1001 Nights is a famous and fantastic fairy tale which the world is admiring it for decades. But did you ever ask where did it come from? How it could manage to keep 1001 stories over the history? In this video we are going to discover, learn, and wonder. The main story is about a king which is violent and cruel and destructive, and he kills a woman every night after raping her. One night when he wants to sleep with two sisters, they start to tell a story for keeping the king entertained and get him to sleep and of course prevent their deaths. And it actually works every night after. These stories, which are individual fantastic, keep the king wonder for 1001 nights. And then, when the last nights are coming, the king learned his lesson, become a better person and a good king which is not violent anymore. So the main story is about three characters and how the magic of stories turns a bad king to a beneficial king and rescue many women. Our question today is, where does this story come from and how was shaped and where and why? To answer a lot of questions, stay with this video. For a start, let's take a look at Iran or Persia in 500 BC. The Achaemenid Empire is shining. So many lands that we know them as individual countries now, back then were just a part of Persian Empire. In one of them, in a city named Baghdad, there was a writer who wrote a book, inspired by the stories that Iranian people used to tell each other and their children. This Persian book was written in Pahlavi, which is an ancient language that was used in Iran back then. That book was called 1,000 Legends. In 6 or 7 AD, when Islam was extending its territory, trying to conquer every neighbor, an unknown person translated 1,000 Legends from Pahlavi to Arabic. And this point is where the Persian book disappears from history. After this time, the Pahlavi version of book is lost. But even the Persian book didn't exist anymore. People kept the stories among them. They used to narrate those stories to each other even 700 years after the Islamization of Iran. These are the stories later appears as 1001 Nights, a book full of great stories. But in the 14 AD, religious prejudices labeled every Persian book that wasn't about Islam or Quran unethical. So many books had been destroyed over the Islamization in Iran. So the Persian book was destroyed, but the Arabic version, which was translated from Persian, survived in Egypt and Syria. And this translation is the book that we received, 1001 Nights. Later the book would translate to Persian again, and other languages. In 17 AD, it translated to French with the exact title. But in 18 AD, it translated to English. And the translator, with no right reason, preferred to change the title to Arabian Nights, all by himself. Even the Arabic title was Alfa Laylatun wa Layla, which means 1001 Nights. But this wrong translation to English made many people think that the whole book was an Arabic book with Arabian stories. But now we know those stories were originally written in Persia and they are Persian stories. Even Wikipedia doesn't know that this book was a Persian book in the first place, or it's just ignoring the facts. Back to our questions. Now we know that in 500 BC, 1,000 Legends was written from some stories, then translated and lost. Then it was narrating between people, and eventually the Arabic translation was handed to us. But now let's take a step further. When Baghdadian writer was writing 1,000 Legends in 500 BC, he wasn't creating the stories completely by himself. He was collecting stories and myths which were much older than his era. We can be sure of this by looking at two ancient books. Some pieces of 1,000 Legends, which was written in 500 BC, were found in Avesta and Rig Veda. Avesta is a collection of Zoroastrian religious texts. There are some evidence that Avesta existed more than 2nd millennium BC. But by the documents, we are sure that this book was written down and published at least 600 years BC. Zoroastrianism served as the state religion of the ancient Iranian empires for more than a millennium, and Rig Veda is an ancient Indian collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns. It is the oldest of the four sacred canonical Hindu texts, known as Vedas, and goes back to 1000 to 1500 years BC. In both Avesta and Rig Veda, we can see so many Indo-Iranian myths with similarities. Because back to the history, these two nations, Iran and India, had common border and were good neighbors with many tradings. From the pieces of 1,000 legends that we found in Avesta and Rig Veda, now we know that 1,000 Legends was an interpretation of an older legend, a myth that we are going to meet it. So grab a cup of coffee, and as we say in Persian, don't let fetish overcome you. In the ancient story that is mentioned in Avesta, there are the same characters and events just as 1,000 Legends, but in a different way of narrate. As some parts of the Avesta were destroyed during Arab invasion, I will narrate the story from Shahnameh, because it's better explained and it's complete. Shahnameh is a great epic book from 10 AD, which protected many ancient Iranian stories from being forgotten. 1,000 Legends, which is based on Avesta itself, was narrated in Shahnameh in a different way. There is a king in Shahnameh named Zahak, with two snakes grow on his shoulders. This bloodthirsty king cut the king before him in half and married his two daughters to become king. Zahak ordered his two cooks to kill two men every day, separate their brain from their bodies, and bring the brains to him for two snakes on his shoulders, as the snakes only keep calm when they had a meal of human's brain. Two cookmen, thinking about the death of young sons from their country, start a trick. They free and hide one of the men every day, so at least one man can be rescued each day. Then mix the other one's brain with sheep brain so snakes can't tell the difference. After a while, the rescued ones, which are now an army of 1,000 soldiers who were training in secret, begin attacking Zahak's empire. The leader of 1,000 soldiers is Feridun, who with their help overthrew Zahak and tied him up in the highest mountain of Iran, Damavand. After that, Feridun becomes a fine king, marries to the two wives of the last king, and ruled for 500 years in satisfaction of the country. Now we can see that in both 1,000 Legends and Zahak's story there are the same characters and events. We have a bad king that people are disgusted by him, two persons who helped change the situation, and a hero who replaced the bad king for better. In Shahnameh, Feridun, with the help of two cooks, overthrew Zahak. In 1,000 Legends, the bad king, with help of two women and stories, become a better person. Nobody's showing up from the outside. The king is just replaced by a better version of himself. I drove you all along this road to ask another question. Why always are there two people who change everything? Why there is not one woman or just one cook? The answer guides us to the agricultural myths. In agricultural world, two women are the symbols of water and soil. To have fertility of the land, water and soil are the necessary parts. In this world, mixing of these two means fertility. Even these two sisters' names in Avesta, Sanghavaka and Aranavaka, are related to water in meaning. Also, it is told in Persian history that Dariush, an Achaemenid emperor, told their enemies in a war, even fight or send us water and land. So water and soil were always important. Now I want to arrive at this point that the same basic basis of the stories, 1,000 Legends, Zahak stories, and 1001 Nights, is the struggle between drought and fertility. The framework of all myths was the agricultural world. The aggressive man with two snakes on his shoulder is a symbol of drought, who destroyed the land. The hero who overcame him, Feridun, is related to fertility because he was raised by a cow and in Indo-Iranian culture, cow is the beneficial and fruitful animal. Also, Feridun is son of Abtin, who literally has the word water in his name. So in all these stories, in frame of agricultural words rules, we can see a repetitive timeline. Everything is in an acceptable balance. Then someone or something attacks and upset the balance. Then a hero will appear and change everything back to the balance, back to the fertility of the land, rains, and all the good forces of the nature. And from these Persian myths, 1001 Nights, and so many other fascinating books are written. Stay with us for next stories and leave your questions at the comment sections. Have a nice time.